Herb Simon owns two basketball teams in Indianapolis, and one of them just finished 19 wins and 63 losses, the worst season Simon has run in 43 years of ownership. 6 days later, the other team handed Aaliyah Boston the largest total contract the WNBA has ever signed. Same building, same owner, same checkbook on both deals, and Caitlin Clark sits right in the middle of it. The result Simon's Pacers just gave Indianapolis is the result he's quietly setting up for the Fever in 2027, the same playbook running on a different floor. 12 months ago, the Pacers were one game from a championship before Tyrese Haliburton tore his Achilles in Game 7 of the 2025 NBA Finals against Oklahoma City. Indiana lost the title that night, and 12 months later, they are sitting at home. By April of this year, that same franchise had become the first team mathematically eliminated from playoff contention, gone by March 10th, out of the running before some teams had even closed their March schedule. .232 is the winning percentage that came back, the worst number ever produced under Simon's ownership. Two of the longest losing streaks in 43 years of Pacers basketball stacked into the same season. A 13-game collapse that ran from December into January, then a 16-game stretch that closed February into March. The franchise that gave Indiana Reggie Miller just delivered its worst record on record, under the same owner who has been signing Indiana basketball checks since 1983. Inside the other wing of Pacers Sports and Entertainment, that same owner is making the same kind of decisions about Caitlin Clark. 19 wins and 63 losses is the final line on Indiana's season. The previous franchise floor sat at 20 and 62, set back in 1982 and 83. This year's Pacers blew past that mark by a single win, which means in 43 years of Herb Simon ownership, the lowest the franchise has ever sunk is right now. April 18th marked the start of the 2026 NBA playoffs. Detroit, Boston, New York, and Cleveland. Every Eastern Conference team that finished above the Pacers is in the bracket right now while the defending East champs watch from home. Tyrese Haliburton, the franchise face who tore his Achilles in Oklahoma City last June, has not taken a regulation minute all season because he is still recovering. The roster Indiana built around him got dismantled while he was on a couch, and that is not coaching. That is not bench rotation. That is what a longtime owner did with his roster while his franchise star was rehabbing. Look at the move that did the dismantling. February 5th, the NBA trade deadline. Indiana rostered a young scorer named Bennedict Mathurin, drafted by the franchise, developed by the franchise, and called a future starter by Kevin Pritchard, the longtime Pacers president of basketball operations. Isaiah Jackson manned the center spot, and 2 future first-round picks plus a second-round pick sat in the asset column. 5 pieces total, every single one of them moved to the Los Angeles Clippers in exchange for Ivica Zubac and Kobe Brown. Read what came back from that trade because Indiana shipped a young scorer plus future picks out the door and brought back a 28-year-old veteran center on an existing contract along with a depth piece. That is not a rebuild, and it is not a championship reload. What that exchange actually is salary work dressed up as basketball work, and the man who signed off on it also runs the Fever. Caitlin Clark just turned 24 years old this past January. Walk this across town. April 11th, Indiana made Kelsey Mitchell the first million-dollar player in Fever franchise history on a $1.4 million Supermax. Read what is below that headline, though, because the contract runs for one single year. Not 3, not 4, just 12 months. Mitchell becomes a free agent again the same week the WNBA regular season ends. The team that just made her the franchise richest player in Fever history did not lock her in past the next 12 months. And that is a structural choice rather than an oversight. The deal essentially says, we will spend now, we will deal with the consequences in October, which is the same logic Pritchard ran at the NBA trade deadline in February. Spend the asset, kick the decision. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And the pattern shows up everywhere on this roster, dressed to look like reasonable basketball decisions when what it actually amounts to is salary management. April 17th, just 6 days after Mitchell's deal, Aaliyah Boston signed a 4-year extension worth $6.3 million through 2029. Largest total value any WNBA player has ever signed on a contract. That is the headline ESPN ran on a Friday night. What did not run with that headline is the structure underneath it. Boston's 2026 salary is $1 million, while the standard maximum she was eligible for under the new collective bargaining agreement was $1.19 million. Her actual signing came in $190,000 below the max on the record, specifically to give the Fever cap room. Her agent put that in writing, and Fever general manager Amber Cox confirmed it on the team's official announcement. So that is not the franchise paying their star. That is the star paying the franchise, so the franchise has flexibility. Stephanie White, the head coach, raised the next part out loud last week, asking whether Indiana can really commit 60% of the cap to 3 players. That is the question Indiana has not answered. The rest of the roster tells you what their answer probably is. Lexi Hull and Monique Billings both signed multi-year deals, and those two are the exceptions on the roster, not the rule. Sophie Cunningham was offered a 1-year contract. Most of the supporting cast Amber Cox brought in around the Big Three came on 12-month commitments, and Kelly Krauskopf, the executive who returned to the front office in 2025, signed off on the entire stack. The cast around Clark and Boston shares the same 1-year clock as Mitchell, which means if Mitchell walks in October, if Cunningham takes a better offer somewhere, if any of those 1 years find a better home, Indiana is not replacing them with familiar faces. The Fever will start over, with Boston locked at 20% of the cap, with Mitchell either gone or back at Supermax pricing, and Clark looking around at a roster of strangers. Run the math on 2027. Mitchell, even if Indiana retains her, becomes eligible for a longer-term Supermax that locks 20% of the cap to her name. Boston is already locked at 20% of the cap through 2029. Clark hits Supermax eligibility in July of 2027. If Indiana wants to keep all 3, that is 60% of a $7 million cap committed to 3 players, which is the exact 60% number Stephanie White raised the question about out loud. 40% of the cap is what is left, around $2.8 million, and that has to cover the other 9 roster spots. League minimum sits between $270,000 and $300,000 per player. So, if you put 9 players on minimum deals, you are spending $2.7 million to fill out a championship roster, which means everyone outside the Big Three plays for the floor. The other version of the math is that one of the 3 has to walk. The Pacers ran through this exact same flexibility over depth bet, with their own franchise star recovering in the background, and the bet collapsed in 19 wins and 63 losses. Indiana basketball used to be the model. 1983 was the year Herb Simon bought the Pacers, a couple of years before the franchise drafted Reggie Miller out of UCLA. Simon sat through the Bird and Magic 80s without a banner, the Stockton and Malone 90s without a banner, the Bulls dynasty without a banner, the Pistons resurgence without a banner. 43 years of ownership, 0 NBA championships in Indianapolis. Tamika Catchings, who ran her entire career through Gainbridge Fieldhouse, gave the Fever 1 ring in 2012. That is the highlight reel of Indiana basketball under Herb Simon. And right now, Caitlin Clark, the most marketable women's basketball player on the planet, sits on a roster where Boston took a pay cut, where Mitchell got 12 months, and where the rest of the supporting cast is on a 1-year clock. Watch what 2027 does to that picture. The Pacers are sitting at home this April. Their owner just signed off on the worst season in 43 years of running them. The same owner is putting his other basketball team through the same flexibility over depth bet, with Caitlin Clark, the most watched athlete in the league, sitting right in the middle of it. Watch what he does between now and tip-off. Same building, same playbook.